like to share with you some aspects of the Global Citizenship and Sustainability Program that I lead along with my colleague Amy Koro-Samshonavam. And as we discuss with you this morning, we will talk about particular tools and strategies that we have utilized in this program for engaged learning, and we hope that these strategies are things that you might also be able to find utility in your own programs. And during our presentation today, we will really be sharing different voices, and in engaged learning, really discovering one's own voice as well as being able to understand the voices of others and hear the voices of others is quite critical. And so we'll share our own voice and perspectives with the Global Citizenship and Sustainability Program. And we'll also want to have all of you share your voices with us and with one another here this morning. But the way that we would like to start off today's presentation is with the students' voices. And so if we could go to the next slide, we would like to actually let you hear some of the voices of the students that have been involved in the Global Citizenship and Sustainability Program as they're being interviewed by our very own Dr. Royal Colley. Thank you.
Now, what inspired you to take this course?
I think I had a few reasons to try and take this course. I think one of the most obvious draws was to be able to experience Thailand. I think one of the coolest aspects of this course, though, that really drew me to it was that it's a very research application-oriented program, and so it was incredibly exciting for me to have the opportunity to learn about a new part of the world, learn about an issue that part of the world faces, and then experience it firsthand in the field.
And what value do you see this in relation to your Cornell education?
I think one of the strongest aspects of this whole course would be the applied research. I think it's really easy at school to have all these papers and study all these subject matters and feel so distant from them. And yes, you can learn about price parity indices, or you can learn about the effects of flooding on how floods are managed, but to see it firsthand is really a whole different level of knowledge. And so the ability to prepare for our time here, and then come here and experience it firsthand is just invaluable to my experience.
There are clearly some barriers to you. What benefits do you see going to the communities that you're visiting in Thailand?
I think that's a really good question. I think right now I would say that we're beginning to see some of the benefits, but I think it's really important for us to be present and present of our impact in the area. And so we have here and now to learn and to also have a two-way learning pattern where we can learn and they can learn. And so how we think we can contribute would be to archive the successes of their flood management skills and also highlight some weaknesses in their flood management. So we're talking to villagers, we're talking to government officials, and we're trying to create this really holistic approach that highlights why this community was so resilient, but at the same time point out areas where they can even help contribute to more resilience.
Okay, that was Sam Woodholtz, and we'll also hear from one of the Thai students from Mahidol University, Phone.
Okay, what inspired you to join the course?
The lesson of aspect of the course because I want to make a more experience to work with other people, to understand how to work with the group, have a more experience for each field, and have to work with the community. I want to work with other people area.
What have been the rewards in the course?
Reward in the course is not certificate on go to the USA, but the rewards are, because it's to how to make the benefit to the local area and help them with my knowledge.
What do you think might be the benefits to the local communities where you worked?
The local community will get the information to improve their community. How should they improve? What should the thing that they have to improve before? How to make the people in the community understand how to work on the government, local community work.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So what is the Global Citizenship and Sustainability Program? The program, as the students that you'll see here pictured on the slide, this is a partnership between Cornell University and Mahidol University in Salaya, right outside of Bangkok. And the program, as we have with Engaged Learning, has focused on four primary components. We have a pre-departure course that we offer before the students travel to Thailand. And in order to select the students, we actually have a rigorous interview and selection process to make sure that we're really selecting students that are making the commitment to this engaged learning experience, and this experience really lasts an entire academic year. We also have an in-country learning experience in both Thailand and the United States for both the Cornell and Mahidol students. And this in-country learning experience is focused on the issue of flooding and community resilience to flooding, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. It also includes a post-departure course, because one of the things that we realized in designing the course is that it's critically important to really have the students reflect and have time to process the learning that happened in country, and to really be able to have the time to write up the results of the community-based research that they conducted. The final component of our program is an in-country learning experience in the United States for the Mahidol students. That learning experience will actually start next week. So Amy and I have been very busy while we're here at the conference, getting ready to host our Thai visitors from Mahidol University who will be coming to Cornell in June. And so the way that we've organized this presentation is actually using a rubric based on Kolb's experiential learning cycle that poses 3 questions to students, and this is what we utilize in our teaching pedagogy. The 3 questions are what, so what, now what? So those are the 3 questions. And we utilize that, those 3 questions to really help students move beyond the what, which is typically describing a reading, an experience, a lecture or a talk. And so anytime we're engaging the students in activities, we really want them to move beyond the what to really the synthesis and application of what we're discussing and what they're experiencing. And Amy will talk in more detail about how learning theory is influencing what it is that we're doing in the program. So the context of the program, as I mentioned, is a collaboration between Mahidol University and also Cornell University, and is really based on this exchange, this reciprocal exchange between Thailand and the United States, so that students are from both universities are getting that cultural immersion and that community-based research experience that we believe is most critical. So the program relationships, we really have the Mahidol University, we have the students, we have the faculty, and we have the administrators. We also have our community partners, and in this case, our community partners were actually government and provincial government in Thailand and municipal government in Ithaca, and really looking at what is the community role in response, what is the government role in response to adaptation for flooding. We also, of course, have Cornell University faculty, staff, and administrators. And so in our program, we were really interested in the intersection in this Venn diagram of these three components. You know, what is that shared space, and how do we create shared outcomes for all of the different people that are involved? And this was something that we found both rewarding and also challenging, because administrators might have very different views of what they might want to see versus a community partner. And so we really were in a constant state of negotiation about what are those shared outcomes that really relate to not only what Cornell University wants to achieve from this program, but what the community partners really value and what Mahidol University values as well. So why flooding? This is the focus of the program is on flooding, and part of the focus on flooding was my own personal motivation growing up in a town that was surrounded by water off of the Gulf Coast of Texas in the southern United States, and really experiencing the emotion, the destruction that comes with flooding, and really wanting to understand, you know, how can we help communities better prepare and adapt to flooding. The other motivation for this is climate change. This is the context for the environmentally related service learning project that the students worked on. Scientists are beginning to make these connections between climate change and environmental impacts, such as flooding, such as extreme weather events. And so we were really interested in, you know, how can we really look at the issue of adaptation and transformation in communities. And natural disasters, you know, how do we cope, how do we respond, how do we adapt? Not only mitigate what's happening, but adapt for the future. Excuse me. So in 2011, there were catastrophic floods in Thailand, across Thailand, and this happened in the fall and really lasted through December and January of the following year. And so communities really had to learn how to live with flooding, and that was the context of what the Cornell and Mahidol students examined, was a retrospective examination of the flooding from 2011. At almost nearly the same time, Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee were hitting the Atlantic coast of the United States. And the southern tier of the United States, the southern tier of New York State, as well as the Hudson Valley was damaged, billions of dollars of damage done, lives lost in terms of flooding caused by these catastrophic weather events. And so this was something that was really affecting two places a world apart, but communities very much experiencing some of the same challenges, and this was the context for the research. We also used disciplinary frameworks to structure the program and our approach. We used the vulnerability to resilience framework, which really helped provide a context for livelihoods, understanding disasters, and really understanding the context of how to move from a vulnerable state to a resilient one. We are also using the disaster resiliency of place, which has more of a U.S. domestic context to it for the work we're doing in Ithaca this summer. In terms of global citizenship, we really utilize a place-based approach of really understanding and connecting to a place in Bangkok, neighborhoods in Bangkok that have been affected by flooding, as well as the Ithaca community that students will be doing the engaged research on in a short few days. We also took a participatory research approach because we really wanted to make sure that the process we were using was not a top-down academic approach, but really a shared approach where we really worked with the community to understand what their particular needs were and how we could fit into that process. And so there was months of planning that went into the selection of the project and the community partners, and we discussed a variety of different alternatives before really deciding on the direction of the project. So the vulnerability to resilience framework, this is just giving you a hint of some of the, one of the frameworks that we utilized that really had these four components, it focused on the actual hazard that the community is facing, how that impacts livelihoods in terms of diversity and security, and also governance and how decision-making, what roles do stakeholders and communities have in the decision-making process, and how can the community plan for future uncertainty. And so at this, our approach to community engagement, as I mentioned, was a participatory one that was really focused on asset-based community development and understanding what assets the community holds in terms of how they perceive their vulnerabilities and their response. We also focused on relationship building and how we could really build relationships not only for a program for the exchange students, but also for long-term research and community engagement. And that really required a lot of dialogue and a lot of negotiation to really create that shared sense of ownership. And so at this point, I would like to transition to the presentation to Amy, who will discuss one of the strategies that we utilized in the program.
Good morning, everyone. So just going to go over a little bit about the experiential learning cycles, and probably many of you are very familiar with it. Since COPES is one of the leaders in the learning cycles, it's kind of talking about how students make sense of their experience, and a lot of them, we do this process as a way for them to reflect. So we also use the DEAL model, which is ask them to describe and articulate their learning and sharing, and identify what does that all means when you actually come in contact with a community. What do you observe? And what is that emotion? So that emotive learning is also part of that process. And so that's what we call it the what, just to make easier, and also for our Cornell students, is that because they can remember this really quickly. And so from there, after you have collected all these data about your learning process, what they are, and articulating them, it's so what? So what, you have those. What are you going to do about that? So you have those experiences, and you're trying to make sense, you try to interpret that experience and then making sense of it, and that's kind of what the so what. And when you get into the now what, which is the apply and taking action to it. So some of this process is actually what we go through almost on a day-to-day basis. You can even go into micro level. And other way of looking at the learning cycle is also, it's a looping mechanism. So you probably heard of a double loop learning from the Sean and Argyris. It's like a lot of time it's back and forth. And then also with triple loop, when you're actually involving the systemic thinking included, which is not what COPES have here, but for this presentation, just want to give you that sense, like these are some of the strategies that we use to better understand and helping the student, guide them through their learning process. And just really quick, going through about our approaches to students' learning. So we put it in the 3 different categories and 3 different components, if you look at it, is the approach of the pre-trip and the during the trip and then after the trip. So if you look at the list that we have created here, so one thing that you probably noticed that's across the board is the reflection piece. And that reflection is an ongoing process, that it doesn't just happen when you're in the country or after the event. You actually start doing the reflection when you're actually doing the pre-trip preparation. I might actually, we didn't put it in there, Sean, I mentioned a little bit, before we actually have our students go through an interview process. So we actually have students apply for the program, and we review their application. They got to tell us why they want to participate in this program, and then we interview them, and then we make the selection. And so even that process itself, the students are already reflecting about their motivation. And the other piece that's across is the community engagement piece. So that local contacts, in the pre-trip, we focus a lot on the Owego, which is 30 minutes away from Ithaca. So connecting that local to the global, which is when they're during the trip, when they're in Thailand, and then looping back when they're in the post-trip reflection. So some of the educational strategies that we use during the pre-trip, the pre-departure course, we rely on a lot of readings. We also rely on some of the experts and in Southeast Asian programs. We also had some of the Thai scholars came to visit Cornell, who actually presented some of their work, and to help provide the context, the local knowledge about the political system in Thailand, the legal system, the social, even simply the cultural etiquette, saying hello in Thai, training them on how to say sawadee ka, and the etiquettes about even taking your shoes off before you enter. So all of that preparation that goes into that, we rely a lot on our gracious guest lecturers that come into the class. Oops, we missed that one, sorry. Let me go back about it. And then the other piece is experiential. We also want to have the case study. So I mentioned about the Owego. So we wanted them to get started and practice and then thinking about qualitative research. And so we used the case study approach, so they actually work as a team, which kind of goes into the leadership and citizenship and team building. For them to work together as a group, learning about some of the flooding issue, flood control management in the United States. And so they have picked out some of the topic that they researched, so they become a little bit more knowledgeable in this area. And leadership and citizenship and team building is a very important aspect of it because they are traveling as a group. They will need to rely on each other for support. And also that this notion about leadership, we always asking them, what does that mean? And is it somebody just who goes up there and says, I am the leader, or simply is that how to bring people together? And so it's a very different perspective. We try to unpack those terminologies and the concept with them, along with the global citizenship. In terms of citizenship, and it has a very meaning, and global citizenship is becoming a more utilized terminology in the United States, especially in the service learning or civic engagement or engaged learning realm. This concept of global citizenship is a very Western concept, very Eurocentric, and so we ask the students to start unpacking those terminology and how do you put that in the context, especially when you travel to Thailand. So now we're in Thailand, and so the students are paired up with the research buddies, which is the Mahidol University students, and also paired with the community mentors. So those are the local champions in the two communities that we worked with in Banduan Market, which is a 100-year-old ethnic Chinese market, and the other one is the Mahasawa Canal, which is the aquatourism site. And they did interviews with the local officials and community members, farmers. They also experienced just being there. So you probably heard from Siam, as you recalled, talking about being present, simply being present, and then to be able to feel what is that like to be in that community context. And then work on case study report, which they continue doing so during the post time. So these are just some pictures that we took from the two communities based research sites. And the post trips. So we do a lot of reflections, but reflection is not simply sort of just write a journal and submit it and things like that. But we continue to do the active reflective. We built in a lot of activities as a way to get the students to start thinking about it. So some of the activities, getting them to get up to the whiteboard, start writing phrases or words that capture what they're feeling and thinking, and some of the terminologies. And we actually, you can't see it very well, but one of the pictures having them to think about what are some of the skills, knowledge, and experience that they have gained after have gone through 3 weeks in Thailand. So now I'd like to move into the Socratic wheel, which is probably pass it around, the sheet of paper. We also want to leave you with a tool, which is something that we are using in terms of assessment. So assessment is pretty big. Like, how do we know the students are actually learning? And so we we thought that using this wheel will provide some sort of visual, and also being a participatory process with the students. So it's not just us evaluating students. Like the tendency that we do, they submit the paper, we evaluate, and then we'll give it back to them. But we are trying to find a way to create this sort of dialogical approach. And the Socratic wheel, it's a way for us to engage the students in a conversation and asking them where you are located. So if you look at those numbers, those are markers, indicators. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's based on the rubrics that I will mention a little bit later. So these are the sort of the 6 learning outcomes based on the value rubrics that's developed by the American College Association of American Colleges and University, AACNU, on global learning. And so we adapted that model as a way for us to assess the students. And so global self-awareness is one of the outcomes, and perspective taking, cultural diversity, personal responsibility, understanding global system, apply knowledge to contemporary global. So those are the outcomes that we had defined. So the idea is actually will look like this once you have the conversation with the students and also looking at the assignments. So you will see the red line. Does that look like red to you guys? Yeah? Okay. So the red line is sort of the expected, and the blue line is the actual. The red is expected where we want them to be, and then the blue is the actual. So the idea, if you look at the global self-awareness, that we were hoping that after going to the trip, that they would be in the number 4, but as they came back, they realized they're still discovering about themselves. So that kind of just adjusted tool that to be used with the student to give you some sort of visual in terms of the distance, and so the gap. And so it's like, So this is just an example, so we'd like to do an activity with you, if you don't mind, is that each of you will have that Socratic wheel, which is blank. Sorry, Roy. Which is blank. And then if you think about each spoke is an outcome. So if you're thinking about implementing, or you currently have a program that involve undergraduate or graduate students, that think about some of the outcomes that you would like them to have. And then if you can start writing down on each of the spokes, I only create 6. And that's pretty much typical. If you have too many, then it gets a little bit too jumbled up. But if you feel the need that you need to create another spoke, you're welcome to do so. But just sort of thinking through if this sort of activity, if we can give you 2 minutes for you to do that. So think about the outcomes that you would like your students to have. And what I'd like you guys to do is actually pair up with the person next to you, or if you would like to walk across the room, you're welcome to do that. So pair up with the person next to you and share with what you have come up with and sort of discuss with each other. Okay? So hopefully maybe you'll get to know somebody that you don't know. Or would like to know, but haven't got a chance to do so. And then we'll give you that for another 3 minutes. How are some of the markers? So it's markers that you can actually define. So it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, or it could be 1, 2, 3. The different way of creating those indicators. The idea is for you to create that indicators with your stakeholders, creating that with your students if you're working with, and sometimes you might want to include the community, because then some of the work that has the community relevancy, like how do they get involved in that conversation as well. And so I just put up the value rubrics, which is what we use to come up with the 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of it is that, so for example, with the global self-awareness, that the very bottom level at that sort of like a baseline is to be able to identify what those are. And then the second would be analyze what it is. And then the third would be evaluate. And then fourth is sort of how do you address it, how to take action. So it kind of goes back to the COPES learning in terms of if you kind of ask the question, what is, now, so what, and now what? So that concept. And the rubrics is very, if I put it up there, you won't be able to read it, but if you're interested, be happy to share that with you. The other thing I want to mention, the other way of developing those indicators is to use the progress indicators, especially that's used in the developments. So you can actually, they have the 3, so what would you like to see is like the best line. So what do you see, and what would you like to see, and then what would you love to see? So like simple concept as that, right? And so just that, it's a way to getting involved your students and people to start thinking. So it's one of the tools as a way to sort of get a visual, get a sense of where are we and how are we doing in terms of program or in terms of students' learning process. So you can do it as a program and you can do it just individually with the student. And then, oh, did I give that away? And then now I'm going to give it to Shorna.
Okay, so as Amy talked about the assessment rubric, another thing that we wanted to do to assess student learning were the actual reflections that students completed. And so many of you are probably familiar with word clouds, and so what we did was we took the students, we had an assignment about global citizenship in which we gave students 4 readings. 2 of the readings were supportive of global service learning trips for Westerners, and 2 were very critical of the global service learning. One of them was Evan Illich's article, "To Hell with Good Intentions." And we asked the students to write a reflection based on that. And so one of the things we did to analyze these reflections was to do a word cloud, which really, the larger the word is, the more frequently it occurred in the students' reflections. And so you can see in the word cloud, this is pre-trip, so this is in the pre-departure course, things like cultures and people and global and service. Service was very large in terms, or frequent in terms of the number of times it was mentioned, things like cultures and globalization. We also gave the students the same assignment. We said, go back to those same papers, reread them now that you've experienced the learning abroad experience in Thailand, and reflect on those readings once again, having the perspective of gone abroad. And you can see that things like community actually stand out in the students' writings. Service is no longer prominent. This idea of a colonial perspective of just helping. It's more about the community and the global experience and the people. And so it was really interesting to see the transformation in the way students were writing and thinking about things like global awareness. We also did frequencies of the words that occurred in the word cloud. And you can see the words across the bottom are ones that really focused on some of these, the rubric of global self-awareness and cultural competencies, and this idea of the dark green being the post and the light blue being the pre, that the self-awareness and talking about I and we is something that was really more frequently discussed after the abroad trip, as were things like community and engagement. And so one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate this learning was with some actual quotes from the students' reflection. So here's a quote from a student that completed the global service learning, the global citizenship assignment. So I would like to ask Usharani to read this.
The personal dissonance I face stems from my attempt to balance my desire to work with others and my strictly selfish yearn to experience and learn. In this context, I say that learning and experiencing are primarily self-centered because their ends lead to personal development.
So this is one where the student was really struggling with this issue of self-interest versus really engaging with the community. Could we have someone volunteer to read the post? Thank you.
Being raised within the American education system, I have been taught to think in a goal-setting fashion. There were always clearly defined goals with labeled steps and barricades to prevent you from deviating. Thus, if the end goal in sight is abstract or not quite clear, or if it changes, it made me feel uneasy and to a certain extent unaccomplished. Currently, I am working on stopping this goal-driven mentality. I am trying to internalize that there is validity and worth in engaging in activities that do not necessarily produce a product.
Thank you very much. And again, these are the voices of the students, and this is one student that really struggled with the messiness and the uncertainty involved in community-based research, that we have a protocol for what we do, but there are always changes, and being responsive to the community and their needs may take us in a direction that perhaps we didn't originally think we would be going. And so this is a student that was really discussing that and how this is transforming the way she really thinks. So what's next? As I mentioned, next week we will be hosting our Mahidol counterparts at Cornell, and these are the students that are part of the summer program. So we actually have 4 new Cornell students that will be participating as research partners with the Mahidol University students, and we also have 5 students from Mahidol University that you can see here. And these students will be working on a community-based research project on flooding in Ithaca, and so they'll be working with local government officials and conducting focus groups and community discussion sessions to really look at how the decision-making and governance process around flooding was, what that process was like during the January 2014 floods in Ithaca. So what we learned that community voice was critically important, and that we really had to make sure that we were always true to the participatory process. We also learned that it was very critical to have clear expectations up front, and this was from faculty, staff, administrators, and students to really, have them buy into this participatory process and the fact that that we may be moving in directions that we may not have originally thought about, and really agreeing on what those shared outcomes are. What was interesting for us as faculty and staff leading the program was that the cross-cultural learning experience was something that the students really took away from this, both the U.S. and the Thai students. And that was almost one of the most important things. And we didn't necessarily expect that. We thought, well, maybe it's their love and motivation and passion for the environment that's driving it, but when they really, in their reflections and in the journaling that they did, we really found that the cross-cultural learning was so critical beyond the immersion experiences. Assessment was also important, and we really tried to assess learning in different ways in terms of written assignments that we assign a grade to the case study reports and things like this. We also had the community critique what the students did. We also had the reflections, and we analyzed those student reflections so that we had a sense as instructors where students were along this rubric of global citizenship that we were utilizing in the course. So we want to close and thank you for the time to talk with you this morning and share with you about our program. And it really is a partnership between a number of different entities at Cornell and beyond, the Cornell Einaudi Center for International Studies, the Southeast Asia Program, Engaged Learning and Research, Also, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences international programs, and the Thai U.S. Sufficiency Education Foundation. So with that, I wanted to draw your attention to the photograph that served as the background for all of our slides. This is the Cornell University campus. We're located on the top of a hill overlooking a lake, Cayuga Lake, and that's the clock tower there most prominently in the center of the photograph. And we welcome all of you to visit us at Cornell if you find yourself in the upstate New York area. Thank you very much. And I believe we do have a few minutes for questions. Yes.
I'm a faculty member, and all I want to do is prepare my lecture, and I want to score the final exam, and that's all I want. Why should I do all this?
Well, Dr. Coley, I think that one of the things that I would stress is that engaged learning is a continuum, and that you can really dive in at different levels. You don't have to dive in at the point of designing an exchange program between, two universities. I think that there are ways to do engaged learning activities that can benefit student learning. The fact that students are applying what they're learning actually will help them do better on their exams that you'll be grading. And so my response would be to really dip your toe in the water with engaged learning. Think about activities in class that you could do, a think, pair, share activity like we did with the Socratic wheel, where you have students talking amongst each other and learning from each other, or a way to bring an application into the classroom and see where it goes from there and how it impacts learning.
I just want to add a little bit is that I actually work with a lot of faculty across the university, and we get that a lot. And my job sometimes is just it's like a saleswoman coming in and say, this is a good thing. And a lot of it is just try to develop sort of this concept and then bring it back to why did you become a professor in the first place? And part of it is that if you believe is that teaching is also part of the discovery process. So teaching is not simply transmitting information to the next group or whoever is with you. Is that the lecture that you give is also part of the discovery process, that you actually can engage not only the students but also the community that you work with to generate and synergize the research that you're interested in exploring. And there's no better way than to see an impact that comes out of your research. So that will actually maybe even make a small neighborhood's livelihood, it's even better than what it was before. And to be able to have that kind of a way of thinking. And so I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. I wish to congratulate both of you for a very, very wholesome and meaningful project or program, that if I may say so, because I can relate to this. I'm involved in a literacy movement, in Pulau Mabul, one of the islands of Sabah. So we have homeless children, we have stateless children, and even boat children living in boats. So how do we bring, our children to school, which is just a makeshift building, and bringing literacy up? So I'm very thankful that I'm here to listen to this. And I think for Prof. Coley's question, the students comment, the feedback given that I find meaning in life, that learning is not just building a product or creating a product, but this experiential learning provides me meaning. So I think that was a very profound comment. But I wish to ask my two great ladies here, how is ICT, involved in this program? How do we harness ICT in this? Because I think this whole conference is about ICTD, yeah?
I saw that, yeah. So I just want to know how do you engage ICT in this, yeah. Thank you so much, but really good job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good question, and we've learned a lot because we're not ICT specialists. We're a professor, and Amy with her work facilitating service learning across the entire campus at Cornell, and so we've learned a lot in terms of ideas about how we could engage ICT. And one of the things that Roy has really challenged us to do and offered, I think, to help us do is to create a case study of this program that could be utilized like a video kind of case study format that could be shared widely using technology to really disseminate some of the findings and learnings that we've had here.
I can see that there's a lot of structure and thinking put into the way you've designed the program, but I'm not able to see clearly the difference between what you're doing and something like twinning that a lot of schools do, and simple student exchange programs, which also sometimes result in the same sort of outcomes, but without having that structure. But how different is it from these? From twinning and student exchange?
We can both respond to that because I think it's a really excellent question, which is what makes this engaged learning versus a study abroad program. And I think in designing the program, we were really thinking about how we could move beyond those kinds of experiences. And part of what I think makes this an engaged learning experience is the fact that we really have a strong community component, and it also has a strong research component. And so the students are working in the communities alongside community partners and with the Mahidol students. That's a really core part of the learning experience. But it's this idea that it's engagement around community-based research and that piece of the exchange. It also, our study abroad programs don't necessarily include reflection, so that really sets it apart from the study abroad programs in a sense that we really encourage that reflection, leadership, team development, conflict negotiation, all of those in the pre-departure and also in country and beyond. And so that's kind of another piece that I think sets it apart.
And I just want to echo that as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have just about enough time for one final question before we end with our session. Sorry?
So as sort of answering that question and kind of echo a lot of what Shona has said, what's different is that one is that the group, the students actually travel as a team, and so that team building and the camaraderie that comes out of it as well. Not to mention that Mahidol University students also come together as a team, and so seeing the dynamic is actually a way for them to say, what is it going to be like given the growth of the technology and the way our world is so interconnected? How are you going to work across the world together? And that's another thing that study abroad or a simple exchange program will not give that to you. The second piece is that reflection, but reflection with a very specific intentionality, so that it's very intentional on very particular subject. So it's not just like in study abroad, a lot of time with reflection, we have a lot of students just blog about their experience. They talk about the buildings that they have seen, or they talked about, I had students who talked a lot about healthcare, but without a lot of the sort of using the art of inquiry and using the inquiry-based approach in helping the students to get into the now what. So you had this experience, what are you going to do? So it's getting that deepening their learning, so not simply just going there and study abroad and have the very sort of beginning. And my point is not to say that study abroad is not a good idea. It's very big on Cornell campus, but this is just a very different approach, especially for students who are very interested in community-based research and community-based learning. Sure.
I would like to add my observation to the Professor Usharaman's question. And I don't know much about engaged learning yet, but from the presentation you made, it was very nice. And I was able to walk through the process from your presentation. So the way I see the difference between engaged learning and or students abroad program or exchange program, at least I can think of 3 dimensions. One is more focused and also structureless engaged. And the third component I can think of is, in order to bring genuine action from people's heart, and people first need to aware the problem and understand the situations, and then need to support from that understanding will bring people's support, or whatever, it's emotional support or their time, contribution, and so on, that will bring true action and also sustainable action. So through this engaged learning or service learning notion, if it is implemented properly, that I think that the intensity, people can understand the issues in community, and also the support people can really contribute to address that problem or that issue would be different from the project to be engaged in, to be presented in exchange program or students abroad program. That is my understanding.
Come back to Richard. He's been having his hands up. Sorry about that.
While designing the program, how important to you the benefit of this program to the community itself, and if it is so, what sort of feedback that you have really got from the community where the program has been implemented? Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that we really had, so the students produced, they were on 2 teams, they produced 2 community products, we call it. One was a case study archive of the decision-making process of the Bangladesh market. They really wanted to have a history. They said, you know, we had this innovation in our community, and how do we pass that on to other communities and help others learn about it? And so they really wanted to really capture the voices, the interviews that were conducted by the students. The other group produced a brochure about strategies for how to cope with flooding. And so those were the 2 community products. And one of the things that we had the community partners do was to really critique the students' proposals. So the students provided an alternative, you know, 4 or 5 different community products that they could do based on the conversations they heard and the results. And we had the community actually go through a process in a meeting of talking through those and deciding which ones were most relevant. And that's how the students developed the community product in the first place. We're going to continue working in this community, so I think it remains to be seen what impact it will have. That's actually what we're going to be doing the second year, is really looking at, okay, what was the impact of those community products now that they're out, if you will, but they were just produced actually about a month ago. So we're looking into that. It's the next step.
Yeah, so just add it a little bit is that what the community is really critical without the community as serving as an equal partner, and a lot of it is this relationship building, because we're in Ithaca, New York, pretty far away from Thailand, so we rely a lot of our counterpart in Mahidol, and who actually has a faculty member has already built a relationship with the local champion in those 2 communities. So through them, their relationship building, and then which allowed to open a door for us to be able to come. And then our first year, this is sort of the exploratory process, kind of like we're getting to know one another. And so we made a commitment that we will be returning to the community, which already signaled that we are committed to that. And and letting them know. And the other thing is that after the students returned, the Mahasawa Canal team actually, they presented the first findings, sort of a draft versions, before they left Mahidol University. And the community actually took the information back to their community and shared with the rest of the people, the village, about what was produced. And then we were just simply there waiting for them, what is our next step? Like, so the student didn't make the decision about what the next step should be. It's actually the Mahasawa community made them the next step. And once we heard what that was, and then the students then start working on it and present it. And so they just finished it in the beginning of May, and so we submitted the report to Mahidol University, and then that which will be shared with the Mahasawa and Bangladesh community. So.
Well, that was actually more or less my question, but just to add on a little bit, you know, we put a great deal of importance on the concept of benefit sharing, and the balance should be at least equal. You know, I mean, you can't really measure these things, but the point is that the community should benefit at least as much as the researcher or the outsider, and it's certainly not tilted, you know, onto the researcher's side. Doesn't matter if it tilts towards the community's side. You know, personally, I'm okay with that. But the point is, my question was going to be, how do you build in sustainability, which I think you've pretty much covered. But I would just say to treat it not so much as a kind of an add-on or you know, a supplementary aspect, but something that you build in right from the get-go and say at the outset you have to come up with an intervention that's going to be sustainable, and it's the community that decides whether or not they wish to sustain it, and if they don't decide, then it's not going to work. You know, that kind of balance of emphasis, if you like, that's tilted more towards the community as equal partners rather than just facilitators or assistants in the process.
Thank you. This is Glenn Mahmood from Bangladesh. When there's crisis or any problem created by natural catastrophe or something like that, that makes the society united, you know. Our experience in Bangladesh says like that. In any crisis like flood, cyclone, or tremor, something like that, the people come together and help each other. So when you thought designing this sort of program or project, have you ever thought when the technology making our society apart from working each other, and when like technology like internet or television or whatever other things taking away of our community feelings, and whenever there is crisis or problem that makes our people working together. So don't you think that those two extreme things are making somewhere in between, where you're designing a project for two different setup of the world, whether in Thailand or in US or something like that. So how the human value will determine in this situation? Thank you very much.
So the question is just how do we, you know, thinking about building technology as part of, sort of the response or intervention when catastrophic events happen. Just okay. In terms of what Bangladesh community is, what we found that technology that they have used was that they have these microphone? No, the loudspeaker. So that was actually stationed in different area of the neighborhood so that they can actually make announcements, say what's the flood level. So you actually have somebody who actually monitor the level of flood, because in this situation, 2011, it wasn't like the flood came in for a week and then it's gone. It was actually there for quite some time. So they were keep watching the flood level so that they can be prepared how many more sandbags they need to put in to prevent the market from getting flooded. And the other thing was door to door, and I know that might not consider technology, but in some ways that is that human technology. And I'm trying to, and the one thing that was challenging in Mahaswa is just because of the geographically, they're very broad, and they was trying to figure out how that might be able to work, but that's actually something that we'll be thinking a little bit more about that, how to, especially in the Mahaswa Canal.
One thing that I would add is the communication technology was really critical, because in Mahasawat, you know, they really didn't have a central place like the Bangladesh market that was the center of the community where people could really utilize that space. And so communication was very, very challenging. They didn't have the PA system like they did in the Bangladesh to really alert people. And so when we did the interviews, there were many people that said, I didn't actually realize this was going to be as severe as it was. I didn't really hear the communications. And, you know, with flooding, I guess the one other comment I wanted to make was about flooding infrastructure, because with flooding, you know, one of the human responses to it is to just defend and put up flood walls, put up infrastructure, engineering solutions. However, if you really don't have the good governance that goes along with any kind of infrastructure, it's not going to be effective in the end. And so if we're not thinking about how we're using our land and making wise land use decisions, the flood walls are not going to be the answer, because that's certainly the issue in the United States, is the fact that we've, and in Bangkok as well, is that we've developed our floodplains. Our floodplains are no longer serving their natural strategies in terms of combating floods and holding water, because there are homes, there are parking lots, there are impervious surfaces that don't allow that water to percolate into the soil as they did in the past. And so we have to really think about not only the infrastructure solutions, but how human values and decision-making plays into that. I think...
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any more questions to ask any of the speakers, you may do so during the participants' discussion, which will be at 12 p.m. today, because we are running out of... Sorry?
Okay, we will just take one last question. Or comment.
Okay, yeah. Maybe you have one last question.
And sort of to answer about the technology and the response to the flood. So if we look at Ithaca, where it's the home of Cornell University. So in 2000 January, while we were in Thailand, my neighborhood was getting flooded. So the technology we used, there were a lot of social media, so Facebook, selfie, Instagram, to let people know. And the government used, especially our mayor of Ithaca, used his LinkedIn and Facebook as a way to get the word out about what's happening. In addition to that, they use broadcast, and the neighborhood association, a lot of people have listserv, so they use that listserv as a way to communicate, like where to pick up the sandbag, how should you go about, where you should place the sandbag, for example, so it's not just sort of randomly. In addition to that, they also recruit volunteers to help put together the sandbag, so they use all this media technology, social media network as a way to recruit and also educating the residents on how to better not to prevent the flood, but actually make sure, kind of maintain the flood so that there's no further damage. So we'll just take one last comment.
Lots of comments, but I'll restrict to only one. In the pre-training, the preparatory training that you give to students, I think going beyond just teaching them about the culture and the etiquettes that are the superficial aspects of a culture, the students would benefit from a few sessions on intercultural communication.
I think that's an excellent point. I have a PhD student that's examining intercultural communication, and it's such a critical issue and one that we're actually emphasizing more in the pre-departure class in the fall. But I also wanted to mention that the guest speakers that we had actually were talking about power. They were talking about corruption, government, government systems, decision making, and then the social structure. So we were really kind of taking a political ecology approach to the guest lecture, so that the students had that understanding of the structures that were in place. And intercultural communication, I think, is really critical, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something we'll emphasize more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, we'll also have a Thai mentor in the fall, so that they'll get some of that cultural communication while they're still in Ithaca, because we have a very high international student population at Cornell, and really getting them to engage with the community right there in Ithaca. So thank you.